morning, boys and girls. Ready for Seaman Part 22? The men grabbed their weapons and ran out of camp. They quickly caught up with the thieves. As soon as the Chinooks realized they were being chased, they dropped the ropes and ran off. While two of the men ran after the Indians, Coulter dropped to his knees and pulled the rope off Seaman's neck and muzzle. Seaman licked Coulter's face and then dashed off after the men. "Come back," Coulter called. Seaman turned and ran to Coulter. The other men stopped and wheeled around. "Let's get back to camp with Seaman," Coulter said. "There's no telling how many of these scoundrels are lurking around out there, waiting for a chance to grab this dog." Before they returned, another Indian was caught in the camp trying to steal an axe. The captains were furious. Lewis ordered the axe thief and his companions out of the camp. "Get out of here instantly," he shouted, his cheeks red and his fist waving. "If you try to steal our property again, we'll kill you." The chief of the nearby Indian village was visiting the camp during all of this excitement. Using whatever signs they could, the captains and the chiefs tried to talk it out. The chiefs blamed the stealing on a few bad men. The captains tried to explain their anger without insulting the chief. This topic was like dry kindling. With one stray spark, a fire would burst out. And when Coulter and the others returned with Seaman, Lewis calmed down. He threw his arms around his dog and let Seaman drench his face with his wet tongue. "I think you better stay here in camp with us, Seaman," Lewis said. "Some of these rascals around here think you're meat free for the taking. If they can get their hands on you, they'll skin you and eat you. And they'll use one of our knives that they stole from us to do the skinning," snarled Coulter. "I'm getting mighty sick of these stealings." He clenched his fist. Shannon laid his hand lightly on Coulter's shoulder. "What do they say in Kentucky? All's well that ends well. You were able to get Seaman back without any injuries. Leave it at that, my friend." "Yes, like my pappy always told me," York added. "Keep the food hot, but the temper cool, or else you eat trouble for dinner." The stealings continued. The captains were past patience and desperate to get past this land of thieves. Thinking they could move quicker overland, the captains tried to bargain with local Indians for pack horses. The Indians set high prices and held out, knowing they had the upper hand in the bargain. Finally, the captains agreed to trade their 2 large metal kettles for 2 horses. Now the entire Corps of Discovery, more than 30 people, would have 4 small kettles for all their cooking. This is the first time the captains had ever traded a kettle, an object precious in this wilderness. The captains decided to lighten their baggage by leaving behind heavy canoes, but Lewis was too angry about all the stealing to let the local Indians have the boats, so he ordered the men to set the canoes on fire. Ooh. While the canoes were burning, Seaman began to bark. An Indian was discovered in the act of stealing an iron socket from one of the canoe poles. Lewis blew up and gave the thief a beating. He shouted at the other Indian clustered around the camp. "I'll shoot the first person who tries to steal anything from us, and," he screamed, "I'll set fire to your houses. We're not afraid to fight, believe me." The expedition continued on foot. Seaman ran beside the men, his tails waving in the breezy spring sunshine. He wore his saddlebags, and the men carried packs, but the heaviest loads were packed on the horses. About a month after leaving Fort Clatsop on April 27th, the Corps of Discovery came to an Indian village by the bank of a stream. Seaman smelled the village's large herd of horses. Little curly-tailed village dogs ran to greet them, yapping excitedly. The Indians were Walla Wallas, relatives of the Nez Perce. Relieved to be back among the Indians they could trust, the explorers made camp near the village. The Corps spent 3 days visiting the Walla Walla village. Seaman played chase with the village dogs and watched the captain smoke with the braves. Yelloped, the tall, dignified chief of the village, presented Captain Clark with a beautiful white horse. The captain felt they should give Yelp something equally generous, so they presented him with a sword and some ammunition for his guns. Soon after the explorers arrived in the Yeloped village, A woman introduced herself to them. She was a Shoshone, and she could speak with Sacagawea. Seaman sat near the two Indian women as they chatted happily. Sacagawea took Pomp, now 14 months old, out of the cradle board so he could play on the ground. Pomp had learned to walk. He pulled himself up, grabbing onto Seaman's neck and fur. Then he steadied himself by keeping one chubby hand on Seaman's fur as he trotted along. The captains asked both women to translate when they met with the chief. During one of their meetings, the chief described a shortcut to the western end of the Lalo Trail that could cut about 80 miles of travel off the explorer's journey. One night, the Walla Wallas threw a huge party for the Corps of Discovery. More than 100 Yakimas came from nearby villages to see the white men. Altogether, more than 300 people, the explorers, the Yelpt villagers, and the visiting Yakimas enjoyed the celebration. Cruzat got out his fiddle, and the Indians formed a large ring around the explorers, who sang and danced till the lively music. York performed his jig to the Indian smiles and cheers. Excited by the attention, York patted his chest, and Seaman raised himself onto his hind legs with his front paws on York's shoulder. York took the dog's front paws and began to dance, but after slobbering York's face with his tongue, Seaman wiggled away. John Coulter, who usually kept quiet around strangers, leaped around the circle, doing an acrobatic dance that made the explorers as well as the Indians cheer and clap. Even little Pomp became one of the entertainers. Captain Clark placed the baby's feet on his own and danced with him around in circles. Pomp squealed with delight. Sacagawea smiled proudly to see her child honored by one of the captains in front of all these people. Then the Indians began to sing, moving their feet in place around the edge of the circle. Gradually, some of them moved inside the ring and danced with larger, looser movements. They grinned and giggled when some of the explorers tried to imitate their dance steps. The men in the Corps thoroughly enjoyed the celebration. On April 30th, the explorers waved goodbye to the Walla Walla villagers. Following the shortcut described by Chief Yelpt, they cut across the bend in the Snake River. The explorers had been hiking for 2 days when Seaman darted through the trees, barking a greeting. The men stopped to see who was coming. Some Walla Walla braves were trying to catch up. They were holding a steel trap that had accidentally been left behind in their village. The captains were astonished. None of the explorers had missed the trap. Clark shook the young men's hand and thanked them. "What a contrast," William Lewis explained. "Those Walla Walla Indians are hospitable, sincere, and honest. But the Chinooks pestered our men, lied, and stole from our camp." Clark nodded thoughtfully. "The Chinooks and the Walla Wallas are both Indians of the West, yet everything about those two tribes is different. Their language, their houses, their values," he smiled. "It's remarkable, Meriwether. These two tribes are as different as from each other as our dog Seaman is different from a wolf." Bidding farewell to the Walla Wallas braves, they proceeded on. A few days later, on May 3rd, Seaman dashed into the underbrush again. He returned shortly with a band of Indians dressed in familiar clothing. They were Nez Perce. The explorers were delighted to see their old friends and followed them to the nearby village. The expedition's supplies were running low, and the men were eager to purchase food. The Nez Perce food stock were also running low, and they were reluctant to sell what little they had. Luckily, Captain Clark had earned a reputation as a doctor when the explorers were living near the tribe last fall. And that time, an old man had shown Clark his sore leg. Clark had rubbed some lotion onto it, and the old man had regained his ability to walk after the treatment. As a result, word of Clark's amazing medical skills had spread through the Nez Perce village. The Indians were so eager for the services of a doctor that they were willing to offer some of their precious food as payment. The explorers settled into camp near the Nez Perce. They felt like they were among old friends. The Indian squaws admired how Pomp had grown. They smiled to see Seaman and the great bear of a dog who had proven so gentle with the village children. They grinned whenever York, the amazing black-skinned man, walked by. But the sight of the nearby mountains sent chills through the captain's spine. Winter snow had been heavy, and the snowcaps on the huge mountains sparkled white against the sky. The Indians said it would be at least a month before it was possible to cross the Rockies. So we are in a prison again, grumbled Charbonneau. First, we're in the prison of the waves on Point Ellis. Then we moved to the prison of the rain at Fort Clatsop. Now we are in the prison of the snow. Even Shannon was too disappointed by the delay to offer cheerful words. If this is the last bite of dried fish I ever had to chew for the rest of my life, I would not be the least bit sorry, he declared at supper. He tossed a few pieces of fish to Seaman, who scrambled to his feet and caught them midair. Mr. Charbonneau, said York, you remember that sausage you used to make out of buffalo when we were on the plains? Ah, yes, Charbonneau sighed. The white sausage. Boudin Blanc. That sure was good eating, York said, closing his eyes to taste the memory. Seaman patted over to York and nuzzled his fingers. York smoothed the fluffy hair around the dog's ears. Remember the buffalo's tongue we ate on the plains, added Shannon. If we could get across the mountains now, we'd finish the buffalo herd full of calves. That means there'd be veal. You remember how tender veal is. Not like this stringy elk meat. Enough talk about food, ordered Lewis. We're all disappointed about the delay. We know a feast awaits us on the plains, but talking about it just makes our appetite sharper. It doesn't melt the snow or shorten the distance we must travel. Patience, that's what we need to concentrate on. Patience. While the Corps of Discovery camped near the Clearwater River, Captain Clark continued to run a medical clinic for the Nez Perce, and the explorers continued to eat the payments for his services. The Indians also paid Clark in horses. In a few weeks, the expedition's herd numbered more than 60 horses. Although the explorers' hunger was satisfied, they would need a stock of food for their trip across the Rockies. The captain passed out a few trade goods that were left so each man could try to bargain with the Indians for the best deal in roots. One day, Coulter took Seaman with him on a visit to the Nez Perce village. When they returned to camp, Coulter was holding up his pants with one hand. With his other hand, he gripped the neck of a large, lumpy sack that hung over his shoulder. The sack smelled like soil. Did the button come off your pants, John? Shannon asked. The young man was holding a pair of moccasins on his lap, repairing them. I've got a needle and thread right here. I'll sew it back on for you. I don't have the button, Coulter said. He held up his coat. All of his buttons were missing too. I do have a sack full of roots, though. Shannon looked puzzled. The Nez Perce Indian love brass buttons, Coulter said merrily. They think they're almost as beautiful as blue glass beads that they use to trade. We're out of blue beads, but we have plenty of brass buttons. They're all over our clothes. Coulter cut strips of elk hide. He sat down on a log and began braiding them into a rope that could be used as a belt. Seaman paddled over and laid his big head on Coulter's lap. Coulter ran a strip of elk across Seaman's whiskers and grinned when the dog twitched his cheeks. I don't mind tying my pants together if it saves me from starving when we cross these mountains. As soon as the other explorers heard the news, they cut their buttons off their clothes and headed for the Nez Perce. Each man traded his buttons for roots. They had their stock of food for the trip across the Rockies. Interesting, huh? Now they just had to wait for the snow to melt. Meriwether, I think your men need something to occupy their time, Clark remarked one evening. They go out hunting, but game is nearly impossible to find. They've traded everything they can spare, and I know they enjoy visiting with the Nez Perce Braves, but they still have time on their hands. Too much time becomes a loaded weight that weighs down your spirit. We're all in that right now, right? You're right, Lewis said quickly. The delay weighs heavy on my spirit, even though I have my journal to busy myself with. I have to remind myself daily to be patient. Lewis looked around the camp. Some of the men were arm wrestling. York was throwing sticks for Seaman to retrieve. Other men lounged by the fire, their feet wiggling nervously. There was so much pent-up energy in camp that the air seemed to vibrate. The men are restless and bored, Lewis said. He thought for a few minutes. What would you think of having a tournament, William? Our men would form one team and the Nez Perce Braves could compete against another. We have plenty of ammunition. We could have a shooting contest. Clark's face lit up. That's a fine idea. We could have a bow and arrow competition too, and foot race. We have plenty of horses, Lewis added. Our men could compete with the Braves on horseback too. The Indians were all excited about the event as the explorers. The Indians were as excited about the event as the explorers. The tournament was held on a sunny day in the open field near the village. Older Indian men and the women gathered to watch the contest, wearing their finest clothes, feathers in their hair, and beads around their necks and arms. The children sat in little groups, eager to jump and carry the braves' weapons or hold on to their horses. Lewis took Seaman to a shady spot near the edge of a clearing and told him to stay. Seaman settled down on the ground, front legs crossed lazily, his head held high to watch the competition. The captains came and sat next to him during the foot race. When Coulter raced by, Seaman sat up and whined. Down, Seaman, Lewis said, stroking his back. You can run with Coulter tomorrow. This is a race for two-legged runners only. The shooting contest was up next, and the explorers took the prize. Captain Lewis became the tournament's champion marksman when he twice hit a mark at a distance of more than 200 yards. The explorers cheered proudly. The Braves won the bow and arrow competition. They also proved to be the better riders. Even John Coulter, the wildest of the white men, couldn't ride a horse as fast as the Nez Perce Brave. Look at that horse flesh fly. Those Braves swooped down a hill faster than an eagle, Coulter whistled as he watched the Braves. He was standing near Seaman, and he ruffled the dog's fur. They ride as naturally as you swim, Seaman, like they were born on the back of a horse. And we're going to stop in the middle of the tournament, and we'll have more tomorrow. 4 days left with this book. I've been learning a lot, and I've been enjoying reading this to you. Have a good day, you guys.